Welcome. My name is Ron Vetter, and I'm one of the guest editors for this special issue of Computer Magazine on the web, the next 25 years. I'm here today to participate in a roundtable discussion with three leading technologists and to get their perspective on the current and future status of the web. Before we begin, let's get a brief introduction from each of today's panelists. How about we just do this alphabetical by first name? That is David, Jeff, and then Lee. David?
Hi, I'm David Allen Greer, and I'm a long-term columnist for Computer Magazine. I'm an associate professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I generally research questions of future of Internet, future of how we govern the Internet, and how technology works with society.
Jeff?
My name is Jeff Jaffe. I'm the CEO of the World Wide Web Consortium. The W3C is the standards organization which convenes the stakeholders of the web and develops next-generation standards for the core technology that underlies the web. In my position, I work very closely, obviously, with Tim Berners-Lee, who is the director of W3C and the inventor of the World Wide Web.
Thank you. Lee?
I'm Lee Rainey, Director of Internet Science and Technology Research at the Pew Research Center, and my entry point to this conversation is that every couple of years we interview or conduct a survey with thousands of technology experts, both in the industry, in the academy, in organizations like the W3C, to talk about the future of the Internet, and we get a lot of insight about what's around the corner.
Okay, thank you all. So we'll just go through and ask a few questions, and we'll see where this conversation takes us. My first question has to do with just sort of where things are currently at. So with the web's evolution and growth and its impact in the last 20 years have been nothing short of phenomenal. And what I was wondering is how you think the web might emerge in the next, say, 25 years, and maybe consider answering the question in terms of near-term, mid-term, and maybe a longer-term view as well. So, David, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I'm not very good at long term. The short and middle are more interesting to me. And I think we're approaching a point of commodification of the web and web services and the Internet as a whole. And we've seen this in other technologies when they move from being new to being ubiquitous and at a point where, in fact, cost doesn't really matter. We have seen the World Wide Web permeate into the industrialized and the wealthy world almost completely, and not only reaching every household, but reaching every business and every kind of activity. We have yet to see that in the mid-tier countries, and certainly not at all in the poorer regions of this earth. And we're going to reach a point someplace, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, where the kind of permeation of the Internet and of the World Wide Web will mean that we all are facing the same kind of infrastructure and the same kind of services, and all of our activities will be linked by this technology.
Thank you. Jeff?
So I would like to build on what David said. I agree totally with what he said. You know, the web has been transformative in terms of every aspect of human endeavor, you know, certainly including information sharing, education, commerce, and entertainment. But I think that it's going to be taken to a new level in the future because, you know, today's web at some level is a consumer web, how we all interrelate with each other. But I think in the future the web is going to become the platform, the technical platform for what's known in the trade, I guess, as vertical industries. So if you look at any vertical industry, whether it's the publishing industry, the entertainment industry, the telecommunications industry, every single industry has a technical platform that it relies on. And increasingly, these industries are tossing out what they have, and they're replacing it with the web. So for example, if you look at publishing as an example, well, what is the web? The web is nothing more or less than a publishing mechanism. When it was created 25 years ago, it was a new kind of publishing mechanism. It was a mechanism where everyone was an author, and you had instant, massive distribution. And those were wonderful ways of handling published information to transform publishing, but it also had a weakness, which is that the typography that was available, the quality of what you could put there in terms of fonts and images and things like that was nothing compared to professional quality typography. So here we are 25 years later, and we understand technically how we can basically do everything that publishers can do with specialized equipment. We know how to do all of that on the web. It'll take us a while to get there, but what we're seeing in the publishing industry is that the web becomes the platform for that entire industry. More commonly understood by consumers is the way the web is going to become the platform for the entertainment industry. Another great example, because everyone knows that distribution of entertainment content, let's say 5 years ago, was not on the web. Everyone knows that it's becoming more and more on the web every single day. And certainly in our strategic planning horizon that you're talking about, the web will become the only delivery mechanism for entertainment content. Education is another example with MOOCs. Finance industry in terms of where does payments take place, or even what currency is. So I think that's the big news for the next 25 years, and it'll be dished out. It'll evolve in smaller chunks over 5 or 10 years. But that's the big news going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Lee?
Just to build on the really smart things that David and Jeff were saying, it's not entirely clear when this will happen, but for lots of people in the next 7 to 10 years, I think the web and the internet more generally will become like electricity in people's lives. It'll be less visible in some respects. We won't necessarily interface with it in ways where we have to type or swipe or otherwise command the interface to do things what we want. It'll be more like an appendage of our lives. It will serve us up information in the very dramatic publishing sense that Jeff was describing. It'll integrate many of the activities of people's lives in ways that don't necessarily have to be touched by human beings themselves. And this tighter integration of machines, artificial intelligence, and human condition will be facilitated by this. We will depend on and appreciate lots of things as robots or robotic activities and artificial intelligence activities become more integrated into our lives. And we will also suffer some social disruptions because of that. The sort of thing that I'm sure we'll come back to later in this conversation, of course, the enormous disruption that we don't quite know how it's going to work out. Not that people don't know how. It's whether the economic disruptions that will occur will yield a better, wealthier, more widespread, happy population, or whether the disruptions will be such that the jobs that are left will not be replaced by newer, better, high-value jobs, and that there will be all sorts of social fallout from that. The other thing that's striking to note, particularly in the last version of the survey we conducted about the next 10 years of technology, is that for a long time, technologists and other futurists have been pretty downbeat about the impact of digital technologies on two big segments of the world, the education world and the health world. We are now going to enter an era where those two parts of our culture, parts of our economic ecosystem are going to be radically disrupted by the Internet of Things, by MOOCs, other provision of educational and learning opportunities, and so the sort of widespread, systemic, almost universal impacts of the web will be felt in ways that they haven't been felt before.
Thank you. Why don't we talk a little bit more about the Internet of Things? And I'd like to get your perspective on how you think access devices such as mobile phones, wearables, the Internet of Things itself with billions of devices interconnected, what impact that may have, and what applications might result from such an interconnected planet. And maybe we'll start this time with Jeff, if you could give your perspective on that first.
Sure, thank you for that. So, of course, people are talking a lot about Internet of Things, and we're looking at both the opportunity, but we're also looking at some risks, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the risks that we see and how we plan to address those risks. If you look at the way people talk about the Internet of Things, a lot of the things relate to specific application areas. Some of the things are medical devices, and they relate to, medical applications. Some of the things are sensors that you put in the city, so that way city management can make more intelligent decisions about how to deploy resources. And the applications that people are seeing for those things are called smart city. And some of the things are used in the factory to improve the supply chain. Those applications are called smart factories. So our concern at the W3C is that all of these things, many of them dedicated to individual application areas, might get stovepiped, which is the opposite of what has made the web successful. What's made the web successful is open data. You don't assume you know in advance what the data is going to be used for and stovepipe it. You make sure that the data is available in open formats for everybody. So we recently started a Web of Things activity in W3C, which is not focused on the interconnectivity level, which is a lot of the work in IoT, and it's not focused on the application level, which is also a lot of the work, smart cities and smart factories. We're trying to make sure that in the Internet of Things, that we maintain the openness of the data and the interoperability so that at the end of the day, a sensor could be used for multiple applications over time. We think that will be a powerful enabler in the IoT world.
Thank you. David, do you want to go next?
Okay. I actually want to jump back and build off something Jeff said in his answer to the earlier question, but it is relevant to the Internet of Things because I think we are largely looking at the Internet of Things backwards. We look at all the deployment of sensors, and this includes mobile phones and the pervasive computing that we have now deployed in the wealthy industrial societies, and say that's going to be the interesting thing. And I think what the interesting thing is how this flips organization, the organizations that we use for production, including not only goods and services, but as Jeff just mentioned, also education and healthcare. The Internet has made it easier to do two kinds of institutions, large-scale democracies and large-scale markets that were very difficult to do before. And when we wanted to provide a service, when we wanted to do something that involved the consensus of a large number of people or the complex interaction of a large number of people, we had to build a big vertical corporation to do it. And indeed, there's a lot of arguments in the economic literature about how that need drove vertically integrated corporations. And as Jeff just mentioned, the Internet lowers the cost of a large number of things and also spreads them very broadly. And so you get organizations that say, we can now act without being part of a corporation. We can get together and have a consent. We can trade ideas. We can trade information. We can trade services without being part of a big organization. And in particular, the institution that right now intrigues me the most on the web is GitHub, which is an organization that's been around for about 3 years. It's a way of engaging a large number of people, not only in open source software projects, but other open source collaborative activities that involve large numbers of people who aren't related to each other except through an internet site, except through something on the web. And as we look ahead, I think that those technology markets where people can exchange things, including I do something on your project and you do something on mine. Democracies where you're making a complex decision based on information that maybe only everyone owns a little bit of it, makes decision points as to where they're going to go, how they're going to deploy resources. And that combined with being able to get large amounts of information will be a fundamentally transformative activity. It will, I think, weaken some of the big institutions that have grown up to support certain activities. I think education and healthcare are primed for being picky on it because people can make decisions without going to the traditional institutions. And that is, I think, going to be the thing we have to watch. It's going to be far more important than the basic idea of this is a form of automation that will get rid of high-paying jobs. It's going to get rid of traditional institutions, and we've already seen that in the publishing example with newspapers. We're seeing it in other forms of activities, and we're watching these new forms of institutions emerge that are much more broadly based and involve many more people in things that were impossible.
Thank you, David. Lee, do you want to weigh in on this question?
And just to underline the point that
David is making, the value of GitHub was dramatically illustrated in recent days with the revelation that it was subject to a pretty substantial denial of service attack, potentially coming from the Chinese. It speaks to its power as a separate way of organizing information and knowledge, organizing people, and of disseminating it in ways that not necessarily nation states would like to have, or any kind of powerful institutions would like to have it disseminated. So absolutely that's the case. In some respects, I think about the Internet of Things in a very practical way to start with. If I'm right that the Internet becomes more like electricity in people's lives, it fades to the background, it becomes more important in the way that they conduct their lives day to day, we're going to have a harder time in the kind of simple polling work that we do at Pew, just saying, do you use the Internet? I think we're going to stop asking that question relatively soon, because the Internet of Things is going to spread it far and wide and into so many places that people will be using it without knowing anything at all about what's going on or what's underlying the infrastructure of the things that they're doing. And when you think about the implications of that, of course, as more data gets fed to people, there are actually sort of a couple of domains where this will happen. Obviously, in the wearables area, people will be emanating more information by the things they wear, the jewelry they have, the jet streams or the data streams that they leave behind. And so there's literally a bodily function to the Internet of Things. Separately, there's a sort of physical part of it. The rooms we will walk into will be connected rooms, and they will know who we are and anticipate our needs or serve us up a variety of things. There are tools now in the marketplace that make up the reality in some people's lives, and will be a much greater reality in later lives. Then there's we'll drive on the Internet. The cars are increasingly becoming connected devices that at some point soon, for some people, will become self-driving and not need humans to be very much involved in the getting from point A to point B aspect of it. There'll be communities that are taking advantage of smart systems, both inside physical places as well as systems that serve those places. And finally, the environment itself, when it is so full of sensors, as everybody anticipates, will be a living, organic, data-feeding, data emanating kind of enterprise. And so one of the stories that comes from the Internet of Things, of course, is that data becomes itself an infrastructure that is exploited and analyzed and anticipated and involved with lots of value creation and also sort of social and political disruption. The other thing, of course, is that as more data comes back into people's lives, individuals' lives, they become more self-aware of what's going on. They're literally monitoring themselves and aware of what's going on with them in ways that they weren't before. Certainly they weren't conscious of before. Another thing is just this sort of very, very human act of thinking. Thinking is going to be a really different thing when there will be so many ways we can access the information we want, when there will be increasingly smart enterprises that can figure out what we need before we even think we want it, and we will sort of have an extra lobe to our brain of all this data being instantaneously available when we feel like we need it.
Thank you. I don't know, Jeff, now that you got to hear David and Lee, if there's anything else you wanted to add of the Internet of Things, or we'll move on.
No, I think we can move on. I would agree with many of the things that they said, certainly.
Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about net neutrality? There's been considerable concern over that issue in the past few years, and also just government regulations in general. Are you concerned that these areas are being adequately addressed, or do you think they're going to get worse over the next few years, better? What are your thoughts on this topic? Lee, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah, it'll be a battleground for the foreseeable future, both sort of the particulars of net neutrality, sort of broader governance structures and protocols and how things work. And there are a lot of people who respond to our surveys who put this at the top of their list of the things that they're worried about. So in a way, for instance, that Jeff was talking about integrated and open communication between all sorts of people and all sorts of devices, there's a sort of a counter-narrative that basically says that the powerful won't let that happen. net neutrality is one way that they might clamp down on the flow of information and who gets to know what and who gets to get access to what for free or for at what price. But there's a broader concern that the web structure itself fractures, and that different places in the world will have different experiences of the information. It won't be open. The flows of information won't be free. They'll be restricted or metered or in some way disrupted by the forces of either government or corporations or whomever. And so in the American legal system, net neutrality is still going to play out, even though the Federal Communications Commission rules are now sort of out there for people to comment on and are likely to be implemented in the way that Chairman Wheeler would like them to be. There's no doubt that there will be a contested court case over this. It's not entirely clear to me anyway. I'd be interested in Jeff and David's answers to this, how it will come out. And there's an even broader set of concerns that people have about the future of ICANN, which is going to be enormously polarized by the time the particulars of the handoff take place, maybe this coming fall, maybe down the line if the Commerce Department tries to decide what to do. There's just a lot of people in the United States who are going to be watching carefully and are sort of on hair trigger alert to think that we're sort of giving up some aspect of sovereignty over the Internet. That's a good thing for America to have. And so these are going to be some of the hottest policy disputes of the years to come.
Thank you. Jeff, you want to chime in next?
Sure. I mean, I'm pretty concerned about certain government regulations, and I think I'd start by expressing my concern even by the way that the government goes about making the regulations. So the Internet and the web are very complex infrastructures designed by engineers and pretty well understood by engineers. And I'm not sure that government legislators and regulators fully appreciate how what they do in one part of regulation might affect the overall ecosystem, and that's something that I'm pretty concerned about. We have we have some goals in our mission statement. One of them is Web for All. We think that everyone should get access to the web. And, when you see in some countries that there are restrictions on people's usage of the web, they might think that kind of censorship is beneficial for one reason or another, but there's this law of unintended consequences. Once people are deprived access to useful information, then they're not able to be as effective in their jobs. They're not able to be as effective as citizens. I guess what I would call for is, most importantly, increasing the dialogue between government, legislators, and regulators, and the technical community. For several years, I participated in the Computer Science and Telecommunications Board of the National Research Council. That's set up in the U.S. government. I mean, each country is different, but that's set up in the U.S. government as a means for the government to get advice from the technical community on, hard policy issues where the technology is extremely important and germane to the way that you set up the laws and the regulation. I think we need more of that, better communications. I'm very concerned that without that communications, people will make, some regulatory decision and not fully appreciate the consequences of that decision.
Thank you. David?
Oh, I could go on for a long time. Everything that everyone has said so far is right. We need to remember in this discussion that the Internet is going to be the foundation of a major part of the world's product and economic activity. And so there's going to be a big fight over it because we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars per year of income, of capital, and everything else. And that is going to attract fights. The other side to remember, though, is that the Internet divides into three broad baskets of things. Services and infrastructure that is governed by national governments, for example, the FCC in the United States. Services largely between Tier 1 networks that are governed by contracts because they generally operate outside national borders that are adjudicated in New York City, and one fairly small, in the long run, not that important, but key institution that's truly international, and that's ICANN. And what I think is going to end at the end of the day is we are going to see national entities pushing their control of the internet the same way they do over their economies. That we have wide open capitalist economies. We have socialist economies. We still have some that are close to mercantilist economies. And that's going to produce a fairly lumpy internet. And that means our assumptions about how it works here versus how it works in Pakistan versus how it works in Burkina Faso are going to be very, very different. It's already very clear that outside the technical community, the certain economic community in the U.S., everyone equates net neutrality with freedom of speech. And very few countries and societies have freedom of speech the way the United States has freedom of speech. And as long as the United States and its technical community insists upon that, we're going to have a fight over it. And I think that's going to be a fight for a long time to come. I think the prior remark about understanding the consequences of the net, that it is a very complicated thing and that very minor decisions or seemingly minor decisions can have national and even regional impact. The cutest example was, 2 years ago, when Pakistan decided to like YouTube and decided to route everyone in Pakistan and YouTube to a null site, which ended up taking out YouTube for all of Southeast Asia because all the routers thought they had discovered a clever little shortcut to YouTube. There are these implications that what you do in your home, in effect, affects what goes on in your neighbors. And that's the fundamental nature of this technology, that it links us together, and that it means that our actions as an individual, as a company, or as a country, affect our neighbor even if we don't intend it. And so when we're fighting over this big economic forum, this thing that will drive the economy of the world for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a lot of fights and there are going to be a lot of bad decisions in the process.
I'd be curious to get your perspectives. If we think there's a lot of social implications for the web, and do you think, 25 years from now, we're still going to have issues with people not being connected and a continued split of rich versus poor, and as you mentioned, David, maybe different parts of the world each having their own internet and becoming more of islands of the web? So why don't we talk about that a bit? And David, let's start with you.
Yeah, not so much islands as lumps. There's a phrase going around the Internet Governance Forum, the lumpy Internet, and it seems that's a good way of describing it. There will always be a rich and poor gap because the rich have more assets and are more interested in controlling it and more interested and more able to exploit it. The thing that I see coming up is we've talked a lot about security and privacy on the Internet and what we needed, and we talked about siloing and other things as being bad. But in fact, we live in a world in which we can't know everybody. We have to put silos around activities, or we get no activities. You end up worrying so much about information around the world or activities around the world that you can't concentrate on what you need to do. I think we're in the process of learning what is the balance between privacy and openness, between security of oneself and a need to engage the community and others who do not know you as being part of this economic activity. I think it is as disruptive as anything we have done since the industrial revolutions that followed in the United States, the Civil War, and in Great Britain, or the mid-19th century industrial changes that build new societies, new ways of interacting with each other, and new ways about thinking of ourselves, our privacy, what is us and what is our proper activity. And that is going to be a fight that goes on 25, 50 years, something on that scale.
What do you think, Jeff? Do you think everyone in the world will be connected to the web in 25 years?
So, I think the challenges between those that are rich and those that are poor, those are economic challenges. I'm not much of an economic prognosticator. I can't even pronounce the word. I'm a technologist, so it's a little bit hard for me to have a lot of authority in making that prediction, but certainly human history does suggest, like David was saying, that there will always be rich and there will always be poor, so that there will always be some gaps. I mean, I would like to focus on the imperative, though, that we have as a civilization to bridge those gaps. So, I think that the web is what I would call a leapfrog technology. You may not be able to get on the web, but if you can get on the web, then all of a sudden your ticket to be part of advanced society, you have your ticket. You've leapfrogged. You've gotten so much closer because all of a sudden, no matter where you are, you have phenomenal access to educational resources, and no matter where you are, you have phenomenal access to markets, and no matter where you are, you can talk to other people, and they can give you pointers and infrastructure and advice on how to make your dream come true or how to make your business a better business. So, I can't think of anything else. I mean, look, when you talk about rich and poor, the people that are poor are going to have clothing that isn't as good. But, if they became richer and they got better clothing, it still wouldn't leapfrog them in the rest of in the rest of their life's goals. But the web isn't like that. If they can get better access to technology, it enables them. So, I guess I would like to see that governments of the world and philanthropists really put more focus on this, trying to bridge the gap. I mentioned to you earlier I work with Tim Berners-Lee, and several years ago Tim started a foundation called the World Wide Web Foundation. It's a sister organization to W3C, whose goal really is to create the web that we want, and certainly part of that is solving that affordability problem.
So what do you think, Lee? Will the web, as David says, remain lumpy 25 years from now?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful insight and sort of unassailably correct. To answer your original question, I think almost everyone will have touch points with the Internet and the web, whether they know it or not. And so to some degree, the access question will, certainly in 25 years, will be long either reconfigured or off the table. What will be the newer reality, I think, is that people's capacities to navigate the new environment that they will live in are very much going to be overlaid with class issues. So if you're a smart, discerning searcher, if you're someone who knows how technology can serve your personal goals or make you a more productive person or help you learn the things you need to learn, that's a set of skills and literacies that will serve you well in an economy that's going to be radically changed in the next 25 years. If you're more passive, if you don't think information matters, if you're more credulous and can't figure out what's good information from bad information, if you're not a very discerning searcher who can't see pattern recognition and act relatively quickly and expeditiously on good information and shun the bad information, there's every reason to think you're going to be in a much worse position than people who are the opposite of that. And so the kinds of tools and the kinds of instincts that both Jeff and David are describing to make sure that people don't get lost in the new environment and certainly don't lose their capacity to be autonomous agents for themselves, it's going to be a huge set of new issues and a huge set of new literacies that as a series of cultures we're going to likely want to address and feel like we need to address. The other thing that really was interesting in our last survey on this question was that one of those skills that people worried will become a class divider is sort of privacy and personal autonomy, that the rich will be able to figure out, or the highly educated will be able to figure out how to present themselves in the ways that they want and to have what's known about them provided to the wider world. And the people who don't have those skills and don't have the capacity to buy their way into whatever identity or privacy regime they want, are going to be struggling. And so one of the exciting things I keep hearing about from the W3C and a bunch of other places like the Berkman Center at Harvard and Doc Searls is that there's a technology community working on some pretty exciting possible tools to give people a lot more sense that they're in control of their identities, control of the information that's provided, and how it's treated after it's spread out into the wider world. But there are ways that the class system will, I think, morph in an environment where data and information and how people navigate those systems will become the preeminent way that we interact as humans and communities.
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to add one other thing. This is Jeff.
Go ahead.
So I mean, what Lee was just saying also stimulated me to make one more pitch for something which I think is very important when it comes to those that do have access to the web and those that don't have access to the web, and that's the disabled community. So at W3C, we have a major initiative called the Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI, W-A-I. And it's dedicated to the proposition that everybody, whatever their disabilities might be, and there could be, cognitive or hearing or vision or whatever, should get a full access to the web experience. And, I think in advanced countries like the U.S., certainly in Europe, we're moving to a society where vital government services, as well as other key aspects of society, are becoming available only on the web. And so we are at a point that unless we ensure that there is full access to information by those that have disabilities, we're cutting out an important fraction of our population, some estimated at 15%, from having vital access to services in our society. And so we've been redoubling our efforts on web accessibility, not from a rich-poor perspective, but from a perspective of making sure that people that have challenges are still able to get access to information.
Yeah, so why don't we just follow up on that just a bit? And David, maybe I'll ask you. So what can we as technologists or computer professionals do to help shape the future of the web, and ensure that the future development makes the world a better place?
Well, I think very lovely plea for equal accessibility to services is the key thing. I have seen in a number of communities, they're all very proud of getting government services and government activities and all sorts of things on the web. And then all of a sudden they have realized that 30% of their population are now disenfranchised. In working with this, I think we do need, if this is the kind of universal technology we claim for, and that's what we do claim for, we have to work to make sure that it lives up to that claim, that it is accessible, that we spend our time not only developing it, but teaching it, promoting it, and making sure that it's deployed in a way that's equitable.
Lee, do you want to follow up on that at all or add any thoughts?
I think there's a lot of energy and commentary and effort being made already in the technology community, and I would just encourage doubling down on the effort to solve or mitigate privacy and security problems. If you have heard Vint Cerf in any one of the many, many speeches he's given on the creation of the Internet, he is very frank to say that they never designed it with privacy and security and trust issues at the center of it, because the people who were designing it knew each other, trusted each other, and didn't think in very grand terms that bad actors doing very bad things would be able to exploit these same protocols. And so there's a way that some of the inhibitions that people have about using the web and some of the concerns about the lumpy web and how it will unfold can be softened by security concerns and privacy concerns being at the forefront of what technologists are trying to do. The other thing would be to encourage technologists to act as humanists every once in a while. One of the most striking things that a lot of the research about the impact of the Internet stresses is how socially and politically disruptive it is, as well as economically disruptive. There are ways that sort of the fundamental human institutions and human encounters and human interactions with each other are being disrupted by this, and we've not worked out to any great degree the new rules of the road about how to be public and private, how to be intimate and available to lots of people, how to be civil to each other in an environment where it's so easy to be nasty and even worse than nasty to each other. And so there are ways I think technologists can bring their problem-solving and fix-it sensibility into those conversations that would be enormously productive. So that would be some of the stuff I would encourage technologists to be thinking about.
So before we wrap up our roundtable discussion today, is there anything else that any of you would like to add or highlight that we haven't touched on in today's discussions?
So if I may, this is Jeff again. I would like to continue what Lee started with in terms of security and privacy and talk a little bit more about what I see there as the problem and the imperative. Lee, quoting Vint, almost characterized the problems that we have there as, an oversight. We didn't need security and privacy in the good old days because we all knew each other. And I think that might have been true a long time ago, but if that were the only problem, we would have solved it by now. I think there's a deeper problem when it comes to fixing the problems that we have with security and privacy. For almost any new technology that we want to introduce into the web infrastructure, there is some stakeholder, some company, some investors who see that new technology as also a new business. And that generates a ton of money, of investment money, to get the new enhancement. So if you have a new way of doing graphics, some company is going to make a business out of that graphics, and they're pumping money into investing in graphics for the web. Same thing for video, or if you have some new approach to social networking, someone wants to make a business out of that, or mobile, some new devices. But security and privacy is not quite the same, in the sense that having proper security and privacy is more a characteristic of the infrastructure itself than a separate business opportunity. And it's also not only a technological statement, but it's also it's very people-oriented. So you can have very secure private infrastructures that become very insecure and very public, I guess is the opposite of private, if they're misused. And for that reason, I think we need a fundamentally different approach. I think we need to find new mechanisms for society to invest in the security of the web, invest in technologies and education to make sure that people understand how to keep material private, because the investment models that we've used for the web in general, which have been enormously successful, they don't scale for this particular kind of problem. And I think that that's an important call out as we think about the future needs of this infrastructure.
Could I add to that a little bit?
Sure.
I think that's a very important point, and it's one that we overlook substantially. And it's because we look at this thing as a technology, and we don't look at it as how it's being a massively socially disruptive force. The comparison is in the United States society during the middle half, the last half of the 19th century, the 1870s and 1880s, when people were moving from farm to factory, moving from farms to towns, and having to learn a whole new way of living, one that was not centered on an immediate family and tight community you had to know well, but on this big anonymous city with people interacting in different ways. And in making that move, we set up a large number of transitional institutions to help people make the jump, that we have nothing of that equivalent on the web. The one that I like to cite most often is the YMCA, which was an organization designed to take young men who had come to the town from the city and civilize them. We forget that the initial stands for Young Men's Christian Association. And they did a variety of things they thought would help young men form communities, learn how to behave towards each other, to learn how to behave as they were in the city, and to keep their minds off of Well, Sid. And in particular, they did, among other things, they invented basketball as a means of engaging men in the winter and keeping them from going out and drinking and involved in other things. We have no similar thing to teach people how to behave, as we've already mentioned, or how to think about your rights and your privacies and the effects of your actions. And if we can in any way contribute to the development of those kinds of institutions, we will have done a good deed.
Lee, I'll let you weigh in last.
It's interesting to hear the conversations in a variety of places that are deeply struggling to get to a place that David's describing. We do a bunch of work related to lives, and they have one of the most disrupted businesses that the web has transformed. And the model that they talk about is not one necessarily of social uplift or filling in for social disruptions, but they're actually picking up the technology sentiment or insight of becoming a platform. So it's facilitating interactions rather than being the host of them, being the enabler of people learning rather than the place where learning takes place. There's a lot of that that's still going on in libraries, but it's a really interesting notion, and thank you, David, for this, that to think that there is probably a new set of social structures to be thinking about in addition to sensibilities that more traditional structures are trying to apply to this new environment. I mean, there's some hope that a lot of people invest, for instance, in the open source community, and as a productive agent, as a mobilization agent, as a learning agent. Those are amazingly productive and helpful and a brand new thing in social relations that we haven't quite seen before certainly at that level and in that form. But there are probably other ways to address sort of real social human needs that are not just about learning and about disseminating insight in the world. It's about sort of helping humans be the nicest version of what they can be. And it'll be interesting to watch how crowdsourcing and open source communities and do-it-yourself groups and amateur experts and non-hierarchical groups begin to sort of think about these things.
Exactly, yeah.
So David Alan Grier, Jeff Jaffe, and Lee Rainey, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. We really appreciate it. To our readers and listeners, I hope you enjoyed this roundtable discussion on the web the next 25 years.